What would you do if you were drowning in debt, with a sick family member counting on you, and your last customer of a brutal shift, a man who ordered the most expensive items on the menu, left you a single, shiny dollar coin as a tip? Would you scream? Would you cry? Would you throw it back in his face? A young waitress in Brooklyn named Clara Evans faced this exact dilemma. She was at the end of her rope, staring at that solitary dollar, a symbol of her failure. But her response in that moment, a quiet act of grace nobody was meant to see, set in motion a chain of events so unbelievable it would shatter her world and rebuild it in ways she could never have possibly imagined. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about how one small choice can echo into a billion-dollar legacy. The air in the Bridgeview diner was thick with the ghosts of the day's hustle: stale coffee, lingering bacon grease, and the faint sweet scent of bleach from a freshly mopped floor. For Clara Evans, it was the smell of survival. At 26, her life was a repeating cycle of sore feet, aching smiles, and the relentless, frantic arithmetic of a life lived on the edge. Every night she would walk home through the less glamorous streets of Dumbo, Brooklyn, the majestic arch of the Manhattan Bridge, a constant mocking reminder of the glittering world just across the river, a world that felt a million miles away. Her own world was a cramped two-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger brother Leo. Leo was her everything, and he was fading. A rare autoimmune disease was methodically stealing the light from his 17-year-old eyes, chaining him to a life of hospital visits, expensive medications, and dreams he could only visit in his sleep. The medical bills were a mountain, and Clara was trying to tunnel through it with a teaspoon. Her own dreams of being a graphic designer, the portfolio gathering dust under her bed, seemed like a luxury from another lifetime. Now her art was the careful swirl of creamer in a coffee cup, the precise arrangement of fries on a plate. Tonight was especially brutal. A 12-hour shift, a broken dishwasher that had left her hands raw, and now her last customer. He'd been sitting in the corner booth for 3 hours, a man who looked like he'd been carved from weathered stone and forgotten by time. His clothes were worn but clean, a threadbare tweed jacket and faded trousers. He nursed a single black coffee for the first hour, his gaze lost somewhere out the window. Then he'd started ordering. Not the cheap daily special. He ordered the New York strip, medium rare, with extra mushrooms, then the Atlantic salmon, just to try the sauce. He followed it with the lobster mac and cheese, a slice of apple pie a la mode, and another of cheesecake. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if dissecting each bite. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble. He asked Clara about her day, about the diner, about the city. She gave him her standard waitress-armored answers, polite, cheerful, and utterly devoid of the crushing weight on her shoulders. Finally, he was ready for the check. The total came to $178.50, a fantastic sale for a Tuesday night. A good tip on this could mean she could finally buy the new upgraded air purifier Leo's doctor at St. Jude's had recommended. She'd been staring at the Amazon page for weeks, the price a glaring red beacon of her inadequacy. She placed the bill on his table with a hopeful, "No rush at all, sir." He barely looked at it. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, extracted 2 crisp $100 bills, and placed them in the folder. "Keep the change," he'd mumbled, his eyes never meeting hers. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. A $20 tip, more than 10%. "I can do this. I can buy the purifier tonight." A genuine, unforced smile bloomed on her face. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night." He grunted in response and shuffled out of the diner, disappearing into the Brooklyn night. Clara practically skipped to the register, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She opened the bill folder, her hands trembling slightly. And then she saw it. The $200 bills were gone. In their place sat a single, solitary dollar coin, its golden sheen mocking her from the cheap vinyl. The air rushed out of her lungs. It felt like a physical blow. $178.50. He had paid with exactly $179.50 and taken the 200s. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated act. He had paid his bill and his tip for 3 hours of her time, for her running back and forth, for her polite conversation, was a single dollar. Her co-worker, Maria, came over, wiping down the counter. "Did that old guy finally leave? What did he tip on that feast?" Clara couldn't speak. She just stared at the coin. A hot, bitter wave of humiliation washed over her. It wasn't just about the money, it was the cruelty of it. The way he had made her believe, just for a moment, that things might be a little easier. It was a game to him. He was a rich man playing poverty, enjoying a feast he knew he could afford, and then leaving a pittance to the person who served him. "No way," Maria breathed, peering over her shoulder. $1? On a bill that big? Clara, that's just evil." Tears pricked at the corners of Clara's eyes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run out into the street and find him and throw the coin at his face. Every ounce of her frustration, every unpaid bill, every worried call from a doctor coalesced into a single point of white-hot rage focused on that coin. She picked it up. It was heavy, cold. She closed her fist around it, the milled edge digging into her palm. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the smell of bleach and grease filling her lungs. She thought of Leo, of his frail smile, of the quiet dignity with which he faced every painful procedure. He never complained. He always found a reason to be kind. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The rage cooled, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. Not just for herself, but for the man. What kind of person, she wondered, would be so broken inside that they needed to inflict such a petty cruelty on a stranger? What void in his own life was he trying to fill by making her feel small? He was just a sad, lonely old man. Maybe that dollar was all he had left. It was a lie, she knew. He'd had the hundreds. But it was a kinder story to tell herself. Instead of pocketing the coin with disgust, she walked back to the now clean table. She placed the single dollar coin neatly in the center of the table, right where his plate had been. "What are you doing?" Maria whispered, her eyes wide. "Maybe he forgot it," Clara said, her voice barely audible. Maybe he needs it more than I do." It was a quiet act of defiance, not against him, but against the bitterness that was threatening to consume her. She would not let his cruelty make her cruel. She would not let his ugliness tarnish the one thing she had left, her own integrity. She finished her closing duties in a haze, the earlier spark of hope now a dead cinder. The walk home felt longer than usual. The weight of the world, she thought, was far heavier than a single dollar. She had no idea that the weight of that particular dollar and the choice she had made because of it was about to tip the scales of her entire universe. The next few days were a blur of muted despair. The dollar coin incident became a lead weight in Clara's soul. It wasn't the monetary loss, it was the symbolic one. It felt like the universe was telling her, in no uncertain terms, that her efforts were worthless. Every smile she faked for a customer, every plate she carried, felt heavier. The dream of the air purifier remained just that, a dream, a browser tab left open on her cheap laptop. Leo had a bad spell. A Tuesday afternoon phone call from the hospital sent a familiar spike of ice through Clara's veins. Dr. Miller's voice was calm, but the words were sharp-edged. Leo's white blood cell count was dangerously low. They needed to start a new experimental round of immunosuppressants. Experimental was hospital code for not fully covered by your already inadequate insurance. The cost mentioned was a number so large Clara felt dizzy just hearing it. She hung up the phone and sat on the edge of her bed, the city's cacophony outside her window fading to a dull roar in her ears. She was failing him. On Thursday, after another draining shift, she found a strange envelope in her mailbox. It was thick, creamy cardstock, a stark contrast to the usual junk mail and thin, transparent windowed bills. Her name and address were written in elegant, flowing calligraphy. There was no return address, only a wax seal on the back, an intricate crest she didn't recognize, featuring a lion and a key. Her first thought was that it was a mistake, or perhaps some kind of elaborate scam. With a sense of weary curiosity, she tore it open. Inside was a single, heavy card. At the top, embossed in gold foil, was the same crest, the Croft Legacy Foundation. The message was brief and bafflingly formal. Miss Clara Evans, your presence is requested for a meeting with Mr. Julian Croft. Friday, August 29th at 10:01 a.m. sharp. Croft Tower, 300 Park Avenue, 80th floor. A car will be waiting for you at 9:15 a.m. Clara read it 3 times. Croft Tower. She knew the name. It was a spear of gleaming glass in the steel that pierced the Manhattan skyline. A monument to unimaginable wealth. It was the headquarters of Croft Industries, a global tech and logistics empire. Julian Croft was a name whispered with the kind of reverence reserved for modern-day kings. He was a notorious recluse, a billionaire phantom who hadn't been photographed in over a decade. This had to be a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank. Maybe Maria, feeling sorry for her, had cooked this up, but Maria didn't have the resources for embossed cardstock and wax seals. She searched the Croft Legacy Foundation on her phone. It was the philanthropic arm of Croft Industries, a multi-billion-dollar organization that funded medical research, educational programs, and urban renewal projects all over the world. There were pictures of hospitals and schools, but none of Julian Croft himself. The next morning, torn between fear and a sliver of intrigue, Clara decided to play along. What did she have to lose? She put on her best and only blouse, a simple navy blue top that was slightly frayed at the cuffs, and a pair of black slacks. She felt like a child playing dress-up. At exactly 9:15 a.m., a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop in front of her rundown apartment building. The sight was so incongruous that several of her neighbors stopped and stared. A uniformed driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and said, "Miss Evans, for Mr. Croft." Clara's heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of her chest. This was real. Numbly, she slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet money. The city she knew, the cracked pavement, the graffiti, the overflowing trash cans, slid by the tinted windows, replaced by the clean, imposing architecture of Midtown Manhattan. Croft Tower was less a building and more a declaration of power. Clara was escorted from the car into a private lobby of white marble and soaring ceilings. A silent, express elevator whisked her upwards, the numbers climbing so fast it made her ears pop. The doors opened directly into an office that seemed to occupy the entire floor. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike panorama of New York City. The 4th was a library of rare books. The furniture was minimalist and exquisite, and sitting behind a massive desk made of a single piece of polished mahogany was a man she did not recognize. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He radiated an aura of calm, absolute authority. Beside him, looking over some papers, was a younger man who turned as she entered. He offered a polite, professional smile. "Miss Evans," the younger man said, "thank you for coming. I'm Robert Chen, Mr. Croft's chief of staff. This is Mr. Julian Croft." Clara's mind struggled to connect the dots. She looked at the powerful, well-dressed man behind the desk and felt nothing. No recognition. "Please, have a seat," Julian Croft said. His voice. Clara froze. It was the same low, gravelly rumble. The same cadence. The same voice that had ordered a New York strip and a lobster mac and cheese. The same voice that had asked about her day. She stared at him, her mouth agape. The silver hair was the same, but now it was perfectly coiffed. The weathered face was the same, but now it was clean-shaven, the lines seeming less like neglect and more like wisdom. The piercing blue eyes were the same, but they weren't lost or vacant anymore. They were sharp, focused, and fixed directly on her. The threadbare tweed jacket was gone, replaced by a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. The old man from the diner was Julian Croft. "You?" she stammered, sinking into the chair opposite him. "But how?" "A change of clothes and a good shave can do wonders, Miss Evans," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "But I imagine you have other questions." Clara's mind was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and shock. The diner, the bill, the dollar. "Yes," Croft said, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the polished desk. "The dollar. Let's talk about the dollar." He explained that for the past year, he had been searching for a new director for his foundation. He had grown weary of the candidates presented to him, Ivy League prodigies with perfect resumes, but, in his opinion, hollow hearts. They knew the theories of philanthropy, but they didn't understand the reality of need. They were experts in managing wealth, not in understanding poverty. So I decided to conduct my own search, he continued, his gaze intense. I've been visiting soup kitchens, homeless shelters, and diners like yours. I wasn't looking for a resume. I was looking for character. I devised a simple, if somewhat theatrical test. He described the test. The large order, the feigned poverty, the seemingly generous cash payment, and then the cruel switch, the $1 tip. It is a test designed to find a person's breaking point, he said, his voice dropping slightly, to see what lies underneath the professional smile when faced with disrespect and disappointment. I have administered this test 37 times in the last 6 months. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Some have yelled. A few have cried. Most have cursed my name after I left and pocketed the dollar with bitter resignation. One man in Queens followed me out and threw the coin at my head. You, Miss Evans, are the only one who did something different. His chief of staff, Robert, discreetly slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen was a still image from a security camera, time-stamped from Tuesday night. It was a grainy, top-down view of her booth. The image showed her, alone, placing the dollar coin back on the center of the table. You left it, Croft said, a note of wonder in his voice. You received an insult and you answered it with grace, with a quiet act of empathy for a man you believed to be pathetic and cruel. You assumed he needed it more than you did. In that moment, you weren't thinking about your own struggles. You were thinking about the humanity of a stranger. Clara was speechless. Her small, private act, done in a moment of sadness and frustration, had been a test, an audition she never knew she was taking. I am not looking for someone to run a foundation, Miss Evans, Julian Croft said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. I have people for that. I am looking for someone to be its soul, someone to guide its mission with compassion and integrity, not just financial acumen. I believe that person is you. He stood up and walked to the window, gazing down at the city sprawling beneath them. I'm not offering you a donation, Miss Evans. I'm offering you a job, a position on the executive board of the Croft Legacy Foundation, a chance to wield a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars to enact real, tangible change in the lives of people just like you and your brother. He turned back to face her. A chance to ensure no one else has to feel the weight of a $1 the way you did. The world tilted on its axis. The air in the opulent office suddenly felt thin. From a Brooklyn diner to the 80th floor of Croft Tower. From a $1 tip to a multi-million-dollar budget. It was impossible. It was insane. And it was happening. The transition was like being shot out of a cannon into a different universe. One moment, Clara was measuring her life in tips and bus schedules. The next, she was navigating a world of boardrooms, financial reports, and unspoken social codes she couldn't begin to decipher. Julian Croft was a man of his word. Within a week, Clara was installed in a spacious office on the 79th floor, just below his own. The contract she signed came with a salary that made her hands shake, and a benefits package that included the best medical care in the world. The first thing she did was call Dr. Miller and tell him to proceed with Leo's new treatment. Cost be damned. The wave of relief that washed over her was so powerful, she had to sit down in her swiveling, ergonomic chair and weep. But the relief was quickly overshadowed by a dizzying sense of imposter syndrome. Her new title was Director of Community Initiatives. Her colleagues were men and women with intimidating degrees from Harvard, Yale, and Wharton. They spoke in a rapid-fire language of acronyms and financial jargon. EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. ROI, return on investment. ESG, environmental social governance, metrics, that flew right over her head. They wore bespoke suits and carried themselves with an effortless confidence that seemed genetically encoded. And then there was Victoria Sterling. Victoria was the foundation's chief operating officer. She was tall, impossibly elegant, with sharp features and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. She had been the presumed successor to the foundation's previous director and had made no secret of her ambition. Julian's decision to appoint Clara, a complete unknown, a waitress, was a public and humiliating slap in the face to her, and she was not a woman who suffered insults lightly. From their very first meeting, Victoria treated Clara with a saccharine condescension that was more insulting than open hostility. "Clara, dear," she'd said, gliding into Clara's office unannounced, "I just wanted to welcome you personally. It's so refreshing to have someone with your unique background on the team, a real-world perspective, as Julian says." She glanced around the office, her eyes lingering on the simple frame photo of Leo that Clara had placed on her desk. "We must make sure to get you up to speed on the basics. Things can be a bit complex here for a newcomer." Every interaction was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Victoria would helpfully explain the simplest concepts to Clara in front of other board members. She would delegate impossible tasks with impossibly tight deadlines, only to swoop in at the last minute to save the day. She would invite everyone on the executive team to after-work drinks at exclusive clubs, conveniently forgetting to include Clara. Clara felt like a bug under a microscope. She spent her days struggling to understand the complex grant proposals and financial models, and her nights devouring books on nonprofit management, finance, and corporate governance, trying desperately to catch up. She was drowning, and Victoria was the one casually holding her head underwater, all with a placid smile. Julian Croft, for his part, was an enigma. He remained distant, offering little guidance. He'd check in with her occasionally, asking broad, philosophical questions about her vision for the foundation, but he offered no practical advice on how to navigate the corporate shark tank she'd been thrown into. It felt like another test, a sink or swim trial where the entire 79th floor was watching to see her fail. The only person who showed her any genuine kindness was Robert Chen, Croft's young chief of staff. He was quiet, observant, and unfailingly polite. He would sometimes stop by her office at the end of the day, offering her a cup of tea and a friendly ear. "Don't let Victoria get to you," he advised one evening, after Clara had spent an entire board meeting being systematically undermined. "Her problem isn't with you, it's with Mr. Croft. She can't fathom a world where merit is measured by character instead of by a resume." "But maybe she's right, Robert," Clara confessed, the weight of her inadequacy pressing down on her. "I don't belong here. I'm a waitress. I know how to handle a 12 top on a Saturday night, not a $12 million endowment." "Mr. Croft doesn't make mistakes," Robert said simply, his words a small anchor in her sea of doubt. "He sees something in you. You just have to see it in yourself." The first real test of her new role came a month later. The foundation was considering its flagship project for the next fiscal year, the construction of a new community center. The two finalists for the location were a trendy, up-and-coming neighborhood in Soho, favored by Victoria, and a deeply impoverished, neglected neighborhood in the South Bronx. The very neighborhood where Clara and Leo had spent their early childhood before their parents passed away. Victoria's proposal for the Soho Center was slick and polished. It was filled with architectural renderings of a gleaming glass structure, corporate sponsorship packages, and projected ROIs based on media exposure and donor galas. It was a project designed to make the foundation look good. Clara's heart, however, was in the Bronx. She knew those streets. She knew the lack of safe after-school programs, the scarcity of fresh food, the sense of being forgotten by the glittering city just a few subway stops away. This was her chance to prove she was more than a waitress, more than Julian Croft's pet project. This was her chance to prove Robert right. She spent the next 2 weeks working tirelessly. She didn't rely on demographic data and financial projections. She went back to her old neighborhood. She spent hours in the local library talking to the librarians. She met with church pastors, school principals, and the unofficial mayors of the block, the old women who saw everything from their front stoops. She listened to their stories, their needs, their hopes. Her proposal didn't have glossy renderings. It had smudged fingerprints from the children who had drawn their dream playgrounds for her. It didn't have corporate sponsorship packages. It had letters of support from local small business owners. It wasn't about what the Croft Foundation could build for them. It was about what they could build with them. She proposed a center that included not just a gym and a library, but a community kitchen, a legal aid clinic, a child care cooperative, and job training facilities. It was a project designed to do good, not just look good. The day of the board presentation arrived. It was to be held in the main boardroom on the 80th floor, with Julian Croft himself presiding. Victoria went first. She was flawless. Her presentation was a dazzling display of corporate polish, all charts and graphs and confident assertions. She painted a picture of the Soho Croft Center as a jewel in the foundation's crown, a magnet for wealthy donors and positive press. The board members, a collection of stern-faced, silver-haired executives, nodded along, impressed. Then it was Clara's turn. She walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding. She had no PowerPoint. She had a simple folder of notes and the stories of the people she'd met. She looked at the faces staring back at her, skeptical, impatient, dismissive. She saw Victoria Sterling in the front row, a smug, predatory smile on her face, already tasting victory. Clara took a deep breath, looked directly at Julian Croft, and began to speak. Not about budgets or optics, but about people. About a boy named Marcus who needed a safe place to do his homework. About a single mother named Elena who needed affordable childcare to hold down a job. About the forgotten, resilient heart of a borough that everyone else had written off. She was no longer a waitress faking it as an executive. She was Clara Evans, fighting for the world she came from. And for the first time since she'd stepped into Croft Tower, she felt like she truly belonged. The question was, would anyone else see it? Clara spoke for 20 minutes, her voice clear and steady. She didn't use corporate jargon. She used names. She didn't present data points. She presented human needs. She painted a vivid picture of the South Bronx, not as a blighted landscape of poverty, but as a community rich with potential, waiting for a single seed of investment to bloom. She explained how a community kitchen could combat food insecurity and teach valuable skills, how a legal aid clinic could prevent wrongful evictions, how job training could break the cycle of poverty. The Soho Project, she concluded, her eyes sweeping across the skeptical faces of the board, is an investment in the Croft Foundation's image. It will be beautiful, and it will be praised in magazines. The Bronx Project is an investment in people. It will be messy, it will be difficult, and its greatest successes will be the ones no magazine will ever write about. It's the difference between building a monument to ourselves and building a ladder for others. The question is, which one is our true legacy? Silence fell over the boardroom. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. They exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's words had struck a nerve, cutting through the comfortable detachment of their philanthropic enterprise. Victoria Sterling was the first to break the silence, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. Clara, that was very passionate, truly. But we have a fiduciary duty to this foundation. The Bronx Project, as you've described it, is a logistical and financial black hole. The security costs alone would be astronomical. The risk of failure is immense. We'd be pouring millions into a community that, let's be frank, has shown very little ability to help itself. The thinly veiled prejudice hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. One of the older board members, a man named Arthur Vance, cleared his throat. She has a point, Julian. The optics of a failure in a place like the South Bronx would be devastating. Soho is a guaranteed win. Clara's heart sank. She could see the tide turning against her. They were retreating back to the safety of spreadsheets and press releases. But then Julian Croft spoke, his deep voice cutting through the debate. He hadn't looked at either Clara or Victoria during their presentations, his gaze fixed on the cityscape beyond the window. Victoria, he said, turning his head slowly, what was the per square foot construction cost estimate for the Soho project? Victoria, momentarily thrown, recovered quickly. $200 per square foot, Julian. Top of the line materials, of course. And Clara, he said, his eyes now on her, what about the Bronx? I've received preliminary quotes from local, minority-owned contractors based in the Bronx, Clara said, her voice regaining its strength. We can build it using skilled union labor from the community itself for under $700 per square foot. And that money stays in the neighborhood. It doesn't go to some multinational construction firm. A murmur went through the room. This was a language the board understood. Croft nodded slowly. And the security costs? Victoria is right. The security costs could be high if we build a fortress and treat the community like a threat, Clara said, meeting Victoria's glare. But my proposal isn't to build a fortress, it's to build a welcome mat. The plan includes hiring community liaisons, local residents who are known and trusted, to be our security. The best security we can have is the community itself, invested in and protective of a place they helped build. Julian Croft leaned back in his chair, a long, thoughtful expression on his face. He looked from Victoria, with her flawless presentation and cold calculations, to Clara, with her passionate plea and deep-rooted understanding. For 30 years, he said to the board, we have been building monuments, beautiful, sterile, safe monuments that have won us awards and accolades. We have become very good at writing checks from a distance. Miss Evans is suggesting we get our hands dirty. She is suggesting that true philanthropy is not about risk mitigation, it is about risk transference. It is about taking a risk on people. He stood up, his presence filling the room. We will build in the Bronx. The words landed with the force of a gavel. Victoria Sterling's face went white with fury, a mask of professional composure barely concealing her rage. Clara felt a dizzying surge of triumph and terror. She had won. Now she had to deliver. The victory, however, made her a marked woman. In the weeks that followed, Victoria launched a covert war of sabotage. Budgets Clara needed were mysteriously delayed in accounting. Crucial meetings with city officials were scheduled and then, accidentally, double-booked, forcing Clara to scramble. Whispers followed Clara down the hallways, that she was in over her head, that she was emotionally compromised, that Croft's pet project was destined to crash and burn, taking millions of dollars with it. Clara felt the pressure mounting. She was working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a desperate fear of failure. She was not just fighting for a community center anymore. She was fighting for her own survival in a world that was determined to chew her up and spit her out. Despite the obstacles, she made progress. She formed a community advisory board made up of the same pastors, principals, and residents she had spoken to before. They didn't just advise, they were given real power to help select architects and contractors. She organized town halls where architects didn't present to the community, but listened to them. The project began to generate a genuine buzz in the neighborhood. People who had been cynical about outside help for decades started to believe. During this time, her only real ally was Robert Chen. He would quietly forward her an email chain she'd been left off of, or give her a heads up about a bureaucratic hurdle Victoria was planning to erect. "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked him one night as they worked late. Robert looked up from his screen, his expression serious. "I grew up in a place like the South Bronx. A scholarship, a lucky break, is why I'm here." Mr. Croft's test. He wasn't just looking for a new director. He was testing his own organization. He wanted to see if we were still capable of recognizing value that didn't come with an Ivy League degree. "You're not just fighting for a community center, Clara. You're fighting for the soul of this place." His words bolstered her resolve. She wasn't just an imposter anymore. She was a disruptor. And she was starting to realize that the skills she'd learned in the diner, juggling a dozen competing demands, de-escalating tense situations, remembering the small details that make people feel seen and heard, were more valuable in this fight than any MBA. The project was gaining momentum. They were a week away from the groundbreaking ceremony. The mayor's office had confirmed attendance. The community was buzzing with excitement. Clara was exhausted but exhilarated. She was proving them all wrong. That's when Victoria Sterling decided it was time to stop playing games and go for the kill. Victoria knew that a direct attack on the Bronx project would now be seen as sour grapes. The board, swayed by Julian's decisive mandate, was cautiously optimistic. The positive preliminary press from local Bronx news outlets was starting to trickle in. To discredit Clara, Victoria needed a weapon that had nothing to do with community centers or budget forecasts. She needed something personal, something ugly, something that would make Clara toxic. She hired a private investigator, a discreet and ruthless man named Gavin Price, who specialized in digging up the kind of dirt that ruins careers. She gave him one instruction: find a vulnerability. Price was thorough. He delved into every corner of Clara's life. Her finances were a mess of medical debt and student loans, but there was no fraud. Her personal life was practically non-existent. But then he found it. a small, desperate moment from Clara's past. 2 years prior, before Leo's condition had stabilized on a less expensive medication, there had been a terrifying month where the bills had become an avalanche. A crucial shipment of Leo's medication was being held by the pharmacy, pending a payment of a few $1,000s that Clara simply didn't have. She was working double shifts, selling what little she owned, but it wasn't enough. In a moment of sheer panic, she had done something she was deeply ashamed of. She had started a GoFundMe page. On the page, desperate to elicit sympathy and donations, she had exaggerated. She wrote that Leo needed a life-or-death transplant, when in reality he needed a costly but not immediately surgical treatment. She used a slightly more dramatic photo of him in the hospital than his condition at that specific moment warranted. It was a lie born of terror, and it had worked. She raised the money she needed, paid for the medication, and immediately took the page down, trying to forget her moment of ethical collapse. This was the weapon Victoria needed. It was perfect. It wasn't a crime, but it was a profound breach of trust. It painted Clara not as a compassionate champion of the downtrodden, but as a manipulative fraud who exploited her own brother's illness for financial gain. Victoria prepared her attack with surgical precision. She had Price compile a detailed dossier, screenshots of the deleted GoFundMe page, bank statements showing the incoming donations, and a comparative analysis of Leo's actual medical records from that month versus the claims made on the page. She didn't take it to the board. She took it directly to Julian Croft. She walked into his 80th floor office and laid the file on his mahogany desk. "Julian," she said, her voice a perfect blend of sorrow and duty, "there's something you need to see. It's about Clara Evans. I am so sorry to be the one to bring this to you." Julian Croft read the file in silence, his face an unreadable mask of stone. Victoria watched him, her heart thumping with anticipation. This was the checkmate. The eccentric old man's noble experiment was about to blow up in his face, and she would be there to pick up the pieces. When he finished, he looked up, and his eyes were colder than she had ever seen them. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Victoria," he said, his voice flat. "Leave it with me." That afternoon, Clara was summoned to Croft's office. She walked in with a folder full of positive updates about the groundbreaking ceremony, a smile on her face. The smile vanished when she saw the look on his face. The dossier was open on his desk. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Clara looked down and the blood drained from her face. The GoFundMe page. The words she had written in a state of blind panic 2 years ago stared back at her, a testament to her worst moment. I can explain," she stammered, her mind reeling. "Where did he get this?" "Explain?" Croft's voice rose, the quiet rumble replaced by thunder. "Explain how the person I chose to be the soul of this foundation, the paragon of integrity, built her survival on a bed of lies? You used your sick brother as a prop to solicit money under false pretenses." "It wasn't like that," Clara pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "I was desperate. The pharmacy wouldn't release his medicine. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared I was going to lose him." "Everyone is desperate," he roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The sound echoed in the cavernous office. "That doesn't give them the right to deceive, to manipulate. The very quality I hired you for, your character, was a mirage. Do you have any idea what this would do to the foundation if it got out? Every project we fund, every dollar we donate, would be tainted by the fact that our director of community initiatives is a common fraud." Every word was a hammer blow. He wasn't listening to her explanation. He wasn't interested in the context. He saw only the black and white of the lie. The man who had seen grace in a $1 gesture now only saw deceit in a desperate plea for help. "Victoria brought this to me," he said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "She was right about you all along. I let my sentimentality cloud my judgment, a mistake I will not make again." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw no trace of the inquisitive old man from the diner. She saw only a ruthless billionaire who had discovered a flawed asset. "The Bronx project will be suspended indefinitely, pending a review. Your employment with the Croft Legacy Foundation is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building." Clara stood there, frozen in disbelief. Terminated. Suspended. Escorted out. It was a nightmare. She had been so close. She had fought so hard, and it was all gone, unraveled by a single, desperate mistake from her past, wielded by an enemy she had underestimated. Two security guards appeared at the door. They didn't touch her, but their presence was a suffocating wall. Numbly, Clara turned and walked out of the office. As she passed the glass-walled conference room, she saw Victoria Sterling inside. On the phone, a triumphant, venomous smile finally allowed to bloom on her face. Clara was escorted to her office to collect her personal belongings. She packed the photo of Leo in her small cardboard box, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp the frame. The entire 79th floor seemed to be holding its breath, a gallery of silent, staring faces witnessing her walk of shame. As she stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on the world she had briefly inhabited, she was no longer director of community initiatives. She was just Clara Evans, the waitress from Brooklyn. Unemployed, disgraced, and utterly, completely broken. The fall was a silent, dizzying plunge. Clara returned to her apartment in a state of shock, the small cardboard box containing a photo of Leo and a few personal trinkets feeling heavier than any tray she had ever carried. The world she had just begun to build, a world of purpose and hope, had been demolished in a matter of minutes. The first day was a blur of disbelief. The second was a thick fog of shame. She had been so close, and she had failed. The true agony began with the phone calls. First, it was Pastor Michael from the Bronx, his voice full of concern. "Clara, we heard the project is on hold. Is everything all right?" Then came the call from Elena, the single mother from the advisory board, her voice trembling slightly. "They're not canceling it, are they? The kids were so excited." Each call was a fresh wound, a reminder of the community that had placed its fragile trust in her. She had failed them all. She offered vague, hollow reassurances, the lies tasting like poison. She had let herself believe she was their champion, but in the end, she was just another broken promise. On the third evening, as she was staring blankly at her laptop, the waitressing job listings a glaring testament to her defeat, a sharp knock echoed on her door. It was Robert Chen, Mr. Croft's chief of staff. He stood awkwardly in her modest hallway, a plain manila envelope in his hand. "Clara, I can't stay long," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What happened was an execution. It wasn't justice." "It doesn't matter, Robert," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He was right about the GoFundMe. I lied." "The context matters," he shot back, his usual professional calm replaced by a fierce intensity. "And so does the source. Victoria didn't just stumble upon this. She hunted for it." He thrust the envelope into her hands. "I'm probably getting fired for this, but I don't care. Mr. Croft didn't build his empire by backing down. He respects fighters. This isn't over unless you let it be." Before she could respond, he was gone. Her hands trembling, Clara opened the envelope. Inside were two documents. The first was a copy of the Croft Tower visitor log, showing a meeting between Victoria Sterling and a man named Gavin Price. The second was a copy of Victoria's expense report, showing a $50,000 payment to Price Investigative Solutions, cynically billed to the foundation as consulting fees. The fog of despair in Clara's mind burned away, replaced by the white-hot heat of pure anger. This wasn't a moral judgment from Croft. It was a corporate assassination by Victoria. She had been so consumed by her own shame that she hadn't seen the truth. She wasn't a fraud who had been found out. She was a threat who had been neutralized. Robert's words echoed in her head. He respects fighters. A wild, audacious thought sparked in her mind. The diner had been a test of her grace. The Bronx Project had been a test of her competence. What if this public humiliation, this utter destruction of her new life, was the final, most cruel test of all? A test of her resilience. A test to see if, when knocked to the ground and kicked, she would stay down or find the strength to get back up and fight. In that instant, a decision crystallized. She was done mourning. She picked up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. With a steady voice she didn't recognize as her own, she called the executive car service and requested a ride to Croft Tower, the charge confidently placed on an account number she would never forget. She was going back into the lion's den, not as a supplicant, but as a predator. The hush that fell over the 79th floor when the elevator doors opened was absolute. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Clara Evans, the ghost of the foundation, strode through the office, her simple jeans and blouse a stark contrast to the corporate attire around her. Her eyes were locked on one target, the glass-walled corner office of Victoria Sterling. She pushed the door open without knocking. Victoria looked up from her computer, her expression of serene command shattering into disbelief. "What on earth are you doing here?" she gasped, rising to her feet. "Security." "Call them," Clara said, her voice unnervingly calm. She walked to the center of the office and slapped the papers Robert had given her onto the gleaming surface of Victoria's desk. "But first, you and I are going to have a little chat about a private investigator named Gavin Price and how you used this foundation's money to pay him to ruin my life." Victoria's face went chalk white. She stared at the proof, then at Clara, her composure finally cracking to reveal the panicked animal beneath. "This is insane. You're a pathetic, disgraced liar, and these are forgeries." The commotion had drawn an audience. Julian Croft, followed by Robert Chen, stepped out of the private elevator, connecting his office to the floor below. He didn't intervene. He simply stood at a distance, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask, watching the confrontation unfold. Seeing him, Victoria saw her chance to seize control. "Julian, thank God!" she cried, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. "This woman is deranged. She's trespassing and making these wild, slanderous accusations to deflect from what she is. A common fraud who used her own sick brother to swindle people." That was the moment. The accusation, meant to be a killing blow, became Clara's shield. She turned away from the sputtering Victoria and faced Julian Croft directly, her voice ringing out across the silent office. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I did that. 2 years ago, I was broke, I was terrified, and in a moment of weakness, I lied on a fundraising page to get the medicine my brother needed. There is no excuse for it. It was wrong, and I will carry the shame of it for the rest of my life." She paused, letting the full, unvarnished confession settle in the air. Then her voice hardened. "But my single, desperate lie to save my family does not compare to your campaign of malicious, calculated deceit to save your ego," she said, turning her burning gaze back to Victoria. "You used the resources of a charitable foundation to hire a spy to dig through my past and destroy me, not because I was failing, but because I was succeeding. You did it because a waitress from Brooklyn was a threat to you. You talk about fraud? You are the fraud. You wear the mission of this foundation like a costume, but underneath, you are nothing but a petty, cowardly bully." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Victoria stood speechless, exposed and defeated. Julian Croft finally moved. He walked slowly toward the desk, his eyes holding no anger, only a chilling finality. He glanced at the papers, then at Victoria. "For 20 years, Victoria," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight, "you have been a competent manager, but you never understood the difference between charity and philanthropy. You saw a person in need, and you saw a threat to your power. That is a flaw I can no longer tolerate." He turned to his chief of staff. "Robert, please have security escort Ms. Sterling out. Her employment is terminated." As a stunned Victoria was led away, Croft turned his full attention to Clara. "The diner was a test to see if you had character when you had nothing," he said. "This was a test to see if you would fight for that character when you had everything to lose. I needed a fighter, not a victim. I had to know if you would break. You bent, Miss Evans, but you did not break." He gave a slight nod. "Welcome back. The Bronx Project is yours again. The groundbreaking is next week. Go build your ladder." 1 year later, the center opened. It wasn't a monument, it was a home. It was loud, vibrant, and filled with life. Leo, now healthy and thriving, taught art classes to kids in the very computer lab his sister had fought for. Clara was there every day, her life no longer defined by the struggle to survive, but by the profound joy of helping others thrive. She had been tested by a billionaire's game, but she had discovered that her true strength was never about the money. It was about the unshakable integrity of a heart that refused to be broken. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't measured by our job title or our bank account, but by the choices we make when we think no one is watching. It's about the grace we show in the face of disrespect, the resilience we find in the depths of despair, and the courage to fight for what is right, even when we feel powerless. Her journey from a struggling waitress to a force for good shows that the most valuable qualities we possess, empathy, integrity, and grit, are often forged in the fires of hardship. Every one of us has the power to turn a moment of bitterness into a moment of grace, and we never know when that single choice might be the key that unlocks our own incredible destiny. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of character over circumstance, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds and a fighting spirit never go unnoticed. And for more incredible, life-changing stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. What part of Clara's story resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you.